Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's message. I'm Eric, the lead pastor of South Mountain Community Church. Thank you for taking just a bit of your time to be with us today. We exist for one reason, and that's to help as many people as possible take their next step towards becoming fully devoted and fully delighted followers of Jesus Christ. And I know that for so many people, church and even religion can be messy and oh so complicated, but it doesn't have to be that way. Here you can belong before you believe. So our hope is that your first visit with us is enjoyable, meaningful, and unlike the church experiences of your past. We also think that the best way to experience delight is with others in person. So SMCC is about more than just a Sunday sermon. We have 5 locations for you to choose from where you can connect with people in authentic community. We want every message you hear to engage your head, your heart, and your hands for a life of full delight. So with all of that in mind, enjoy today's message.
For those of you I haven't met, my name's Trevor. I serve as one of the pastors here at SMCC. Just want to say thanks for joining us this Sunday, and I'm looking forward to the time together. So with that, I'd like to open up with a little bit of an interaction here. And the question I want to throw out is just, what is your favorite Christmas song, or at least one of your favorite Christmas songs? And again, looking for interaction, so please feel free to shout it out. Let me know what is a Christmas song that you enjoy. Silent Night, yeah, okay, for me, that's like the pinnacle of the Christmas experience. Christmas Eve, candles, the whole shebang. What else? Oh, Holy Night? Yeah, that absolutely wonderful one as well. What else? Mary, Did You Know? Yeah, that one's so good. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Well, I gotta say, okay. So one of what'd you say? Mariah Carey. Oh yeah. Yeah. Classic, right? Yeah. It's not Christmas without it. So I'll say that one of my it's not my favorite Christmas song, but I will say it's part of the fundamental experience of the Christmas season. Is the classic song "I Want a Hippopotamus for Christmas." Right? It's not the Christmas season unless that song is heard at least one time. The early 1950s, little 10-year-old Gayla Peavy singing this song. It's a classic, right? That song is classic because it's this little girl who only has one thing on her Christmas list, just one thing that she wants, which just happens to be a hippopotamus, right? But the story is, or the song is intentionally playful and silly. But the interesting thing about it is that I think sometimes we have a tendency to kind of live our lives in a similar manner, where we have this list of things kind of drafted up in our mind that we think when we have these things, then we will be happy, that we have an understanding of what the life is that we desire, what the features of that life are, and if we can only get those things, then we will experience happiness. In the very same way that this girl wants a hippopotamus, we want certain things in life because we believe they will produce happiness. And yet so often I think what many of us have discovered is that these things have come to fruition in our lives, and yet they have failed to produce the happiness that we long for, at least in any lasting manner. And so really the question I'd like to explore together this morning is just, what does produce happiness? Because over the past several weeks, and today we're continuing this series that we've been going through here at SMCC called Happy Christmas, where we've been exploring really the theme of happiness and what produces it, what kind of steals it or robs our lives of it, and what leads to it. And I think one of the things that would be nice, and we've explored it biblically and theologically, we've kind of looked at it from a couple of different angles, and wouldn't it be nice if at some point we could just kind of pause and maybe sit down with Jesus over a cup of coffee or some eggnog and just say, you know, what leads to happiness? You know, you are Jesus, you know a few things, creator, redeemer, savior, Lord, all of that. So what produces happiness? Wouldn't it be nice to have his 2 cents on that question? Well, thankfully, we actually do. Because there's one speech that Jesus gave, one teaching, one sermon that he actually delivered, likely on many different occasions, that has thankfully been recorded for us in the biblical writings, that is a speech in which he actually provides his answer to this question of what produces happiness. It's a sermon that is known as the Sermon on the Mount. In the very beginning of it, the introduction, the section that opens it up is called the Beatitudes, for the name kind of coming from the Latin translation of it. But within these Beatitudes, within this introduction, 8 different times he opens with this phrase, "Blessed are the, or blessed are those who. And so 8 different times, it's this introduction, this unit. And within this, he's really doing a couple of different things. On the one hand, he's unpacking the gospel. He's explaining really what the core message of his life is and what ends up being the core message of his life, death, and resurrection, the gospel message. He's unpacking it through these 8 statements of blessing. But he's absolutely doing so through a way that leans into happiness. Because the word that's translated into blessed, if you dive back into the original Greek, you'll find that the word is makarios, which probably translates most directly into modern English with the word happy. And so he's saying over and over again through these 8 statements, happy are the, happy are the, happy are the, happy are those who. And so he's explaining the gospel, but he's doing so in a way that appeals to and explains his answer to the question of what produces happiness. And so, over the next 25 or so minutes that we have together, what I'd like to do is just kind of dive into those 8 statements and see what we can learn together from Jesus' answer to the question of what produces happiness. And so, jumping in, Matthew chapter 5 is where we'll be hanging out. Matthew chapter 5, picking it up at verse 1, this is what we see. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. And he said, this is the very opening beatitude, the first of the 8 statements. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Happy are the poor in spirit, you could say. Now with this, to break this down, you could ask, well, what does he mean by it? And in some ways, I think Jesus is providing a little bit of commentary on a lie that was prevalent back in his own day and age some 2,000 years ago and is no less alive and active today. The lie that so many of us fall into believing that in order to be happy, we must be wealthy. And I think in some ways this is an answer to that question. And he's saying that wealth doesn't produce happiness, that poverty doesn't produce happiness, and being in the middle doesn't produce happiness either. That happiness isn't the result or the product of being in some category of wealth, but instead it's a matter of being poor in spirit. You could ask the question, well, what does that mean? What does it look like to be poor in spirit? And I think one helpful way to get there is just by asking about the contrast. What does it mean to be rich or to be wealthy in spirit? Because in Jesus' day and age, you could have asked that question of anyone and they would have had an answer to the question. Someone or a group of people that they would have pointed to who were absolutely wealthy in spirit. They were the religious leaders, the people who were zealous, they were pious, they were had fervor in their religious zeal. They checked every box, they kept every rule. And so if you asked anyone who is spiritually wealthy, everyone would have said them. And even they themselves would have answered the question in the very same way. They would have said us, of course. Like me, I am spiritually wealthy. But then Jesus comes on the scene and provides this alternative explanation saying, happy are the poor in spirit, not the wealthy in spirit. And the explanation for their happiness is that the kingdom of heaven is theirs. You could ask, well, what on earth is he getting at? What does he mean? In a way, I think these Beatitudes function almost like little puzzles that are interconnected, almost like a crossword puzzle. And I think what he's getting at is how the gospel is actually bad news before it's good news. That the first thing that the gospel clarifies is the bad part of it, or the negative part of it, is that we are spiritually bankrupt. Right? That our accounts are empty, that we have nothing. In fact, we are actually in debt, and there is nothing that we have to offer, which is the bad news that sets us up to be able to receive the good news. And so in a way, what Jesus is saying when he says, happy are the poor in spirit, he is making it clear that those who think they are spiritually rich, those who think that they don't need me, is what Jesus is saying, actually are unhappy because they don't even have the kingdom. Right? Those who think they can pay their own way, or those who think that they have something held up in their spiritual bank accounts, those who want to pay most of the way or part of the way and have me cover whatever is lacking, those who want to go that route, don't actually have the kingdom. They don't receive it because they fail to grasp the reality that they are spiritually bankrupt. Whereas the poor in spirit are able to recognize their spiritual poverty and are able to grasp and to recognize and to receive both the bad news and the good news of the gospel. And I think when we see it like that, we can see that what Jesus is really saying is happy are those who live with a daily dependence on God. Happy are those who understand that with Jesus we have everything, but without Jesus we have nothing. That apart from him we are completely and fully spiritually bankrupt. But with him we are wealthy. With him we have the kingdom of heaven. And so happy are those who live from this standpoint each and every day. Happy are those who live with a daily dependence on God. That's the first one. And the first couple ones take a little bit more time to unpack because they're foundational. So that's the first one. Second one is this: blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Which is interesting, right? Because he's saying happy are those who mourn. And how can that be the case? Because mourning is something that tends to be a pretty sad experience. So how can mourning lead to or produce or even be associated with joy? And I think what he's getting at is the idea that happy are those who grieve their losses in this life. And in a sense, they're connected. Happy are those who grieve and who mourn over their sin, over their rejection, their rebellion against God, the ways that they have damaged and severed the relationship that we have with God, really the recognition of their spiritual poverty. So they're connected in that way. But I think it even goes beyond that to say that grief is a choice. That even when it comes to sin and our rejection against God, that we have the ability to acknowledge that or to deny it. Right, or to minimize it, or to ignore it, or to pretend like it's not there. And even beyond that, we all go through losses in this life. I think even in the Christmas season in particular, this is one of those few times of the year when we feel those losses more poignantly than others. When there are loved ones who aren't with us that would have been in the past, when there are things that we've suffered, when there is sickness and disease and things that we've lost within this life, we have a choice about whether or not we will grieve those things. We will go through suffering, but the response to it is our decision. And I think one way to ensure that our emotional life goes completely haywire is to refuse to grieve. Is to choose to shortcut the process, to bypass the grief, to not acknowledge and to say goodbye to the things we lost that held so much value within our lives. And so happy are those who mourn, because in choosing to grieve the losses in this life, we have the ability to be comforted, both by God and by others. And so happy are those who choose to grieve, those who mourn, for they will be comforted. That's the first two. All right, kind of chugging right along here, third one, Matthew 5:5. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek. Okay, now if you're anything like me, I grew up in the 90s, and growing up as a kid, I think most of us would say that meekness is not a goal that we had desired, right? Nobody grows up saying, I really want to be meek. As a kid in the 90s, I had two goals for my adult life, and one was to become Michael Jordan, and the other was to become a Ninja Turtle. And you can see that neither of those actually happened for me. But neither of those are really people that you could describe as meek either. And so I think meek isn't something that we seek out in life, because a lot of times we associate meekness with weakness. And so what is Jesus saying here? And I think one way to get at it is that he's saying, happy are those who understand all of life as a gift. Happy are those who understand all of life as a gift. And again, these are like interconnected puzzles. So you can start to kind of piece them together in a way that's helpful, in a way that clarifies what he's saying. So for those who have recognized their spiritual poverty, they've mourned their sin, they've mourned the things that they have done that have caused damage to their relationship with God. And on the other side of it, they've come to this place where they have a grounded understanding of what their value and their worth is, as God has defined it, as Jesus has defined it, right? And so it's not that they have this low self-value and think that they don't have anything to offer. Right? They agree with God about their worth and their value. And because of that, they're in a position to understand that everything in life is a gift. Right? That all of the good things we have received, including the value and the worth that Jesus offers to us, all of that is a gift that we do not deserve, and yet we are free to receive and to enjoy. Whereas the contrast of that, I think, puts us in a place where if we have the understanding that we are spiritually rich, that we have something, that we're not bankrupt, if we've ignored or minimized the ways that we have fallen short, if we've denied that those are there, I think oftentimes we can find ourselves in a place where either things are going well in our lives and we give ourselves the full and complete credit for it. Every good thing we have because we earned it. And that can have a tendency to produce some pride, to produce some self-righteousness, to produce even a way of looking at other people that is not particularly helpful. And then if we find ourselves on the other side of that coin where we still look at life in that way, but we are looking at the lives of everyone around us, seeing people with the home that we wish we had, seeing people with the cars that we wish we had, seeing people take the vacations that we wish we could take, having the relationships, having the children, having the lives that we wish we had, but don't. All that produces is bitterness and resentment and envy, which are all things that are absolute killers of happiness. They choke it out of our lives. And so the meek are those who have recognized their spiritual poverty, who have mourned over their sin and are at a place where they agree with God about what their worth and their value is. And they can see and understand that every good thing we have in this life is a gift and can be thankful for that. So blessed are the meek. Moving right along, Matthew 5:6. The next one says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Now, I don't tend to find hunger to be an really a pleasant feeling. And I think most of us would agree that thirst is even worse. But I think what Jesus is saying here is that blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. The idea he's getting at is that blessed or happy are those who are committed to honoring God. Happy are those who are committed to honoring God. And I think this is one place where I want to be a little bit careful, because I think this is where we could veer off with our understanding of the Beatitudes, because we might look at it, if we have kind of a background in religion, I think it would be easy to interpret it along these lines, that basically Jesus is saying, okay, you trust in me and you're in, and now you need to get your act together and live in a particular way. You need to choose the right thing in every situation so that as you do that, you'll be happy, because as you choose the right thing in every situation, you'll make God happy with you, and he'll give you all the good things that you're wanting in life, and that will produce happiness. I think it would be easy to interpret this along those lines, and I want to be clear that that is not what Jesus is saying here. But instead, remember, he's explaining and he's unpacking the gospel through each and every one of these statements. And so what he's saying is, you already have all of the love and approval and delight in you from God that you could ever have. And nothing can take that away, that he loves you and delights in you and approves of you. And so you can live from that, not as something that you have to earn or maintain in the sense that you can lose it, but you can live in the grounded security that it has already been given to you. And so you can choose the God-honoring thing in every situation, because Jesus is inviting you into that for your good and for your happiness, but not because your relationship with him is in any sense in danger when we misstep or fall short in this life, because it isn't. And I think in a way what Jesus is getting at here is actually pretty brilliant. Because if we're to look back at our lives and to ask the question about where are the decisions that we have made that we regret the most, I think the majority of the time, those decisions are the ones we've made when it was clear what the wrong thing was and what the God-honoring thing was, and we chose the thing that wasn't honoring to God. That it's not too often that we run up against a decision where it's difficult and it's hard and it's sacrificial, but we end up choosing to honor God. That's not usually the decision we end up regretting. It's the one where we choose the wrong thing, and it goes on to wreak all of these consequences within our lives, within our relationships that are harmful and that rob us of our happiness. And so Jesus is inviting us into this, not because we'll lose his approval if we misstep, but simply because he's inviting us into the way of life that is for our happiness. And so happy are those who choose the God-honoring thing, who are committed to doing the God-honoring thing. All right, next one. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. I think this one's pretty easy. You just kind of flip it around. Unhappy are the unmerciful. Unhappy are the vengeful. Unhappy are those who are committed to making sure that people get what they deserve. Unhappy, and you could flip it around and get to the point where it says happy are the relationally generous. Happy are the relationally generous. Happy are those who are willing to offer others forgiveness. Happy are those who are willing to be generous in extending mercy and extending kindness and extending forgiveness within their relationships. Because I think the alternative of that is to take things like bitterness, like unforgiveness, like resentment, and maybe we're justified because the other person actually did cause us harm in some way, because that happens in this life, and yet to choose to continue to indulge in those things because they feel good in the moment is not a way of life that actually produces happiness in the long run. To indulge in resentment only produces more resentment. To indulge in bitterness only produces more bitterness. And I'm not saying that we can't have and feel and express our anger, because it's healthy to do so. And also, to extend mercy and forgiveness is one way to release so many of these other negative emotions and instead free ourselves up to be able to enjoy and experience the happiness that Jesus invites us into. And so, happy are the relationally generous. All right, next one is blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the pure in heart. Now, this one's interesting, again, because I think a lot of times we don't tend to associate purity with happiness, right? If you grew up in sort of this wave of Christianity that had a really something called purity culture, that could be a particularly damaging thing in some ways to grow up in. That took really a religious way of understanding life and applied it to sexuality in a way that I think caused a lot of harm for a lot of people. And outside of that, just culturally speaking, outside of the church entirely, I think most people don't tend to associate happiness with purity. That's why Vegas is what it is, and people go there expecting to find happiness, right? And so how can this be the case? And I think the truth is what Jesus is saying here is happy are those who pursue purity in every aspect of their lives. Because it says happy are the pure in heart. And biblically speaking, heart extends beyond just the world of the emotions. The heart included the mind and the will and the emotions. And so happy are those who pursue purity in every aspect of their lives. And I think that what trips us up here sometimes is we look at the lives of other people, and sometimes it can feel like you're on the outside of the party, like you're missing out, like you're not in the fun or the action. And yet, I think what we see here is that Jesus is actually inviting us into the way of life that is for our good, for our joy, for our happiness, because in this way of life, what he says is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And the pursuit of purity, again, not to earn God's favor, but in response to God's favor, in response to his love and approval, is one of the ways that we move deeper and deeper into our relationship with him, where we come to understand what God is doing within us, within our lives, and even within the world around us, that we can understand his ways and live according to them rather than against them, and find happiness in doing so. And so happy are those who pursue purity in every aspect of their lives. All right, two more left. So number 7 is this: blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And again, you can flip this one around. Unhappy are those who cannot help themselves but cause trouble, right? Unhappy are the slanderous. Unhappy are those who indulge in gossip in a way that is damaging to other people. Even unhappy are the peacekeepers, right, rather than peacemakers. Unhappy are those who take every resentment, every anger, every offense, and every even opinion and just bury it inside without ever bringing it into a relationship. That doesn't produce happiness or peace. What that produces is ulcers. And I think that's what Jesus is making clear here. That instead, happy are those who make peace in relationships, who make actual peace in relationships. Because the interesting thing about this is happy are those who make peace. Happy are the peacemakers because they will be called children of God. Because in living in this way, we're actually living in the very same manner, living in a way that aligns with the very character of God. And that's actually a significant part of what we celebrate at Christmas, that the birth of Jesus was always tied to his eventual death, that he was born so that he could die on our behalf in order to make peace between us and God. We even see this going back to a passage that's often included within our Christmas celebrations, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. It's written some 600 years prior to Jesus' birth. And the prophet Isaiah says, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace." And that he was born to take on our humanity, to live the lives that you and I could not live, a life of perfect spiritual wealth, to then die on our behalf, to pay the price of our spiritual debt, to then rise from the grave and invite us into the way of life that we were made for our happiness. And that's really why we celebrate his birth at this time of the year. And when we make peace in relationships with others, we're acting in a way that aligns with his exact character. And so that is the seventh one. Blessed are the peacemakers. And the final one, 8 of 8, is right here, Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Happy are the persecuted is what it sounds like, right? Which again is not the easiest thing to unpack. But I think he's getting at another reality of life here, that we will suffer in this life in the way that we will suffer actually at the hands of other people. Because I don't know if you know this, but out there are some selfish people in this world. Thankfully, none of them are in here, and you don't have anything to worry about in here, but out there, they're there. Right? Every one of us, we have selfishness and brokenness in some way within us that at times causes us to inflict harm on other people. And we live surrounded by other people who are the very same way. And the result of that is that we will suffer within this life. We will suffer harm at the hands of other people. And Jesus is saying, happy are those who suffer for choosing righteousness. That you can suffer for making decisions in one way, or you can suffer for making decisions in another way. That we can choose to suffer for making decisions that honor God, for pursuing purity, for being relationally generous, or we can suffer because we refuse to grieve, or we deny our sin, or we ignore our spiritual poverty, or we choose to hang on to unforgiveness and resentment. But he's saying that the choice is ours. You're going to suffer either way, but you can only be happy suffering for one kind of decision. And it's the kind of decision that honors God. And so those are the Beatitudes. And you know that it's a complete set because both of them, the beginning and the end, they kind of bookend with the very same ending with, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And really what Jesus is inviting us into in this is the way of life that is marked by his kingdom, what it looks like to live in the kingdom of heaven. But I hope really one thing has become clear as we've walked through each one of these and unpacked what it means, what the gospel is, and how it fundamentally is an invitation to happiness. The key idea of all of this is that happiness is the result of the choices we make. That every single day, the choices that we make along the lines of these different decisions that Jesus has just unpacked for us, whichever way we go, we are making an investment in the emotional experience of our lives. And we can either make decisions that will produce happiness, or we can make decisions that will produce the opposite. But either way, every single day we make choices that will produce one or the other. And for each and every one of us, the choice is yours. And so if I was to close with anything, I think it would just be a simple question of how might you invest in your happiness tomorrow, today? Would you pray with me? Jesus, we thank you for your teaching in this subject. We thank you for the Beatitudes, this relatively short passage in just 8 simple statements that have so much depth and are really so profound in so many ways that they cut to the heart of life on so many different issues. And yet we thank you that within them, you've clarified the decisions that lead to joy, the decisions that lead to happiness. And that really the beginning of it starts with trust in you, and every step along the way is one marked by trust in you. And that as we do so, growing in our trust in you one step at a time, that we can grow in our happiness in you as well, finding delight as we honor you within this life. And so for that, we thank you and we praise you this morning in your name. Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's message and trusting us with your time. If you'd like to connect with one of our pastors or staff, you can easily do that by visiting smccutah.org/connect. When you fill out that quick form, they will get back to you within a few days and be able to connect with you. As well, if you'd like to know more about taking a next step at SMCC, you can easily look at what next steps we have by visiting smccutah.org/nextsteps. And lastly, if you found today's message both hopeful and helpful, I would encourage you to do maybe one of two things. First, you can share this message with someone that would find it helpful. And you can also choose to partner with us financially so that more people can see messages like this. You can find more information on what that looks like by visiting smccutah.org/give. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you at one of our locations soon.